Coming up on A Courageous Heart.
It was in my psyche, in my heart, it was the darkest, coldest, worst place I've ever been in my life. And I had an abortion.
A Courageous Heart with Karen Dye.
Hello and welcome to another edition of A Courageous Heart. I'm Karen Dye. You know, the enemy loves for us to keep our sins in the past, in the dark, and never really getting them out to allow God to heal us, to forgive us, to acknowledge that He still loves us. As long as the enemy keeps us in that place, we're paralyzed. But the day we decide to open that door and be healed and let God touch our hearts, that's the day everything changes. But to do it does take a courageous heart. Lorraine, thank you so much for spending time with me today. I think what we're going to talk about today is really going to resonate with a lot of viewers in our audience, particularly women. And since the program is called A Courageous Heart, I just really appreciate your courage in being willing to share your story in the hopes that others might find the same healing that you have found in Jesus Christ. So let's start by getting right to the subject matter. Tell me what happened to you, Lorraine, at the age of 16.
When I was 16, like a lot of 16-year-old girls, I found myself madly in love. I knew that it was a love that was going to last forever, and that we'd get married and, go off into the sunset together. That didn't happen. I found that I was pregnant, and when I told my boyfriend that I was pregnant, he told me to have an abortion, and that he didn't want to have anything to do with me. I knew nothing about abortion, but when he said that, I remember thinking how wrong that would be. And I don't honestly think I gave it another thought. This was a long time ago, and it was actually before Roe v. Wade. And so I carried my baby to term, and with the help of my family, made an adoption plan. But at 16, I was so naive. I had no idea what I was doing. So subsequently, I began looking for love in all the wrong places yet again.
What kind of emotions does a 16-year-old go through, Lorraine, when they find out that they're pregnant? Now, obviously, you're head over heels in love with this young man and thinking, this will still work out. We'll get married, we'll raise the child together. And then you knew you had to tell him, and then his rejection, and then having to tell your parents. Were you Christians? Was that something that was going to bring shame to your family? Were you afraid to tell them? Just take us back a little bit to what goes through a young woman's mind when she first finds out she's pregnant and it is an unplanned pregnancy.
Panic, sheer terror, and this is a 16-year-old mind. Actually, the boyfriend and I, now that looking back, it's like, oh. We actually kind of planned to get pregnant so that my parents would let us get married. And it was such a beautiful plan in my 16-year-old mind until it happened. And then I was absolutely in terror. I was just beside myself with horror of what my parents would say. I thought about suicide a lot. I just didn't want to live. I couldn't imagine. I, I remember going home, and by that time my parents, I mean, you know, I'd run away, and so they figured it out. I hadn't been to the doctor, but I knew I was pregnant just from all the symptoms. And I cried so much for the next year that I thought, you know, I could never cry again. So I faced the music, you know, with my parents, and it was just sheer shame. I mean, most of my adult life, I think I've lived, you know, and carried that shame, and, you know, for the other things I've done. But my parents let me know how shamed they were of me. We were a family who went to church, and my parents did the best they could. My dad actually taught a Sunday school class up until the time he found out I was pregnant, and then he stepped down from that because he was so ashamed, you know, of what I'd done. And I got that message loud and clear.
You said you started looking for love in all the wrong places. That makes me believe that perhaps instead of getting better after that year, knowing that you've made a mistake, that you did the best you could for the baby, giving it up for adoption so that it would have life in a home, that instead of sort of bringing yourself up out of the ashes, that you took a downward spiral instead. And I think, again, that's probably the enemy who tried to destroy your life. Tell me what happened in the subsequent years after that first year where you said you just could not stop crying. How did you react, and what did your behavior become at that point?
I kind of ran away, almost ran away from myself. I told, people knew obviously that I was pregnant, but I'd been pregnant in high school, and when I graduated from high school, you know, a lot of those kids weren't around anymore, and so because I had nobody to talk to about what had happened, the adoption, I didn't have any way to process it, and I just started looking for that new guy that was going to love me. And every next guy was going to be him. And was still just as naive as I'd been before. And within about 9 months after the baby was born, I got pregnant again. I was just terrified. And I didn't have any idea what to do. I don't honestly remember telling the young man, and this young man was somewhat older than me by a few years, and was in college. I had just graduated from high school, and I was working in my hometown. I don't remember telling him. I don't remember his first reaction, except that he said, "Have an abortion. It's easy. I've done this before. Call this number." And where I was working, I just remember the pressure to do that, you know, have the abortion, you know, here's the number to call, no big deal, I'll pay half, you'll pay half. And again, I mean, I knew nothing about abortion except in my mind it was wrong. I didn't want to do it, and so I do remember in my mind trying to sort of make time go by and not making the call. I do remember that, and I remember his asking me almost on a daily basis, "Have you made the call? Have you made the call?" And I finally did. And again, this was before Roe v. Wade.